Welcome back to Endless Tangents. This is episode 5. I'm your host, Twiggles, with my trusty co-host, Zamb1esaurus. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm very excited to talk about today's topic.
I am as well. So for many of my friends in real life, they all know when they think about me, they know that I love talking about financial therapy. Odd topic, but I've come to realize after we've been friends for so long that some of the things that really resonate with me is just the idea of money. I never could really understand why it was so important. And as we've gone through the years together, I think the biggest epiphany that I've had, at least, is just the psychology of money and the emotions that are involved, how we feel about it, and can we tangibly explain what's going on in our heads? Or are we just reacting from how we were raised as kids or things that are coming up in our lives, comparing ourselves to other people? There's so many interesting facts and stories to talk about.
Yeah, you talk about the psychology of money. There's so many things that are going on with it, right? It's not, as you said, it's not just about what is it about money or like how you grew up, right? It's a set of experiences. Your spending is based on your experiences as you grew up. And
whether good or bad.
Exactly.
Right?
And other people who have different experiences, they might be better at spending money or worse, but they're experiences that you haven't had.
Exactly.
And everyone is trying to make their way through life. And if you don't know, you just don't know. There's so many different aspects of money, whether it's like budgeting, financial advice for retirement or, career advice, job advice, like 401k and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's so many different things to talk about.
Exactly. So just a friendly reminder, we are not finance experts in any way. We're not giving any investment advice. We're just simply sharing our experiences, the things we've researched to help us on our journey, and happy to kind of share just some of the things that we've gone through. So as you said, I think, where do we start? One of the things that I think we've kind of compared ourselves, we have some similarities and also some differences, right? So I'll introduce a little bit with how I grew up. I think with a typical kind of family that I grew up with, the term, I think, is more of a scarcity mindset. My parents were immigrants, and they came into America and had a lot of dreams. We followed my grandfather here to America and started to set up a business, and went the entrepreneurial route. But there was always this sense of, we don't have enough. We have to save, right? We had some money. I think I was very fortunate that we were never homeless or super poor, but we also weren't filthy rich, right? We tried to live as frugally as we could. I was always taught to, again, save money and invest carefully, and safely. It was really often not about taking the risk, but how we spent money was to, make good decisions and buy things that are frankly cheap, right? We didn't want to spend too much money, and that really stuck with me. Anytime I'm in front of a menu, I'm always looking for the quote-unquote best deal, especially at a restaurant. It's not even about what I would find myself enjoying or want to eat or consume. It would often just be, that looks like a good deal, that's what I have to order, right?
It's funny you mentioned that, because at the point where I am at today, my wife always makes fun of me because whenever we go to a restaurant, I always end up finding the most expensive thing on the menu. and we're not talking about going to a fancy, okay, we are talking about going to a fancy restaurant, but it's also like one of the things you don't do very often, right?
Right.
But
so while you're there for the experience,
because in my mind it's become, well, I don't know when I'll ever come back.
It's true.
I might as well try it.
Yeah. But then it goes into budgets, which we'll talk about a little bit later, right?
Yeah.
But kind of curious, how was your upbringing? Do you have any particular money messages or memories from your parents that you maybe acquired willingly or unwillingly?
Yeah. So I had a different childhood growing up. It was a lot more financially constrained, unfortunately. My family too came to America to live the American dream and run a business, but the cards didn't really get dealt out in their favor. We ended up on food stamps, and trying to understand as a child what it's like to be poor. It's very difficult, right? Like you see the differences as you grow up between other kids. They might have nicer clothes, nicer sneakers.
Seem
That's
to
like
have bigger houses. You're always getting
bigger
hand-me-downs.
houses, cars, and you're trying to wonder, like, what, why can't I have that? And
right.
that actually really is a communication problem, which we will definitely cover in another episode. But it was just difficult. We never really had enough money. So did we eat out, for example? No. What we would do is we would go to like the local grocery market and get like 100 pounds of meat, and we would freeze it all. We would all sit at the kitchen table. I distinctly remember buying like so much meat and sitting there and bagging it and
the old school
sealing
Costco.
It. Yeah, and oh, forget Costco. Like, we're talking like Indian or Asian grocery market,
Yeah.
And we would bag like 100 pounds of meat, and it would last us for months and months. And I grew up in a family of, it was my mom and dad, and I have 4 other siblings. So it was a large family. And, we never ate out. We would always cook every meal together, which provided a different aspect, which is not as much financially related, but like the home aspect.
One of the most, one of the largest fixed, expenses that you typically have is groceries, right?
Yeah.
And how much you're spending, and like you said, nowadays, with obviously back then it was a little bit different, but with organic groceries, with special premium stuff, who knows? You could very easily spend so much more money. Multiplicative.
Yeah, it's so easy to look back and think of those memories fondly, but it came from a place of, we just didn't have the money to eat out at restaurants and stuff like that. And as I grew up, I remember another distinct memory of, I started playing tennis. I was actually good enough that my coach wanted me to like go to camps and stuff and get better. And my family was like, we can't afford it.
Yeah. What do we learn as now parents? Some of those extracurricular activities are just so expensive, especially when it requires a special court, or, swimming, tennis. I've heard a lot about baseball. Many of these different sports, there's just a really high cost of upkeep to be able to just even participate, you know, not to mention travel leagues and things, right? You'd have to have a car to get around.
It's a lot worse today than it was like, 20 or 30 years ago too.
Yeah. Much more local. You'd typically go to something nearby, but yeah, I agree. That's tough. What I think was interesting also is, going beyond kind of some of the food and expenses. So my family growing up, we did go out. We did typically go, again, like I said, more cheaper stuff. So we were often frequenting, fast food and things like that. But if we did ever really kind of go out to a nicer place to eat, I kind of remember it's something that, you don't always order an appetizer. You're going out, you get a main course, and that's kind of it, right? Like you said, you don't get to go out often. And when you do that, just focus on the nice things, right? It's still something ingrained in me now. I really struggle to, for example, as we're growing older, and it's kind of the fun thing to do is go out for brunch. But then something deep down in me just says, but I can make breakfast. I know how to make breakfast and brunches. So why am I spending so much money on these things? Obviously it's there for the experience, it's there for socializing, but there's other kind of things where I struggle to, feel good about spending the money on. Kind of curious, as you said, like some of the foods feel more worth it, right? So like, for example, getting a nice steak or nice meat, or again, nice dining experience, sushi and things like that. But there are some things that maybe in my mind just don't feel as gourmet, right? And I really struggle to grasp the idea of how much I'm actually spending on the foods, and am I getting that value of enjoyment out of it? Which kind of puts a damper on the whole dining experience, if that's all I could think about,
Yeah. It's when you put it that way, it's the psychology behind like how much money am I spending has a huge impact on the food that I'm eating. But one thing I've realized is like, if you want to eat something that's delicious, the price doesn't matter.
Right.
Right?
Some of the most delicious things that, me and my family like to eat are more, street food, right?
Yeah.
Just commonly, readily available, relatively cheap, That's what we've kind of discovered and realized.
One of my favorite foods is Panda Express. I love orange chicken. I live in an area that has no Panda Express. I would have to drive an hour minimum to go get it, an hour each way. And yes, I have done that because I like it, but I'm not gonna worry about the cost of it because it's not something I'm doing all the time. But it does satisfy a need, right?
Yeah.
And so,
it's also probably a core memory too for you.
It is, it's something,
hits different.
It tastes good. It warms you. It feels great when you eat it. After eating it, we're not so much. We're not going to talk about that. But, you just feel happy while you're eating it, that bliss, right? I think it was in The Matrix, right? Cypher's eating the steak and he's just like, this is bliss.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to leave the Matrix.
So shout out to the Panda Express. So if you're listening, kind of write out what your guilty pleasure is. What is that thing that you would go out of your way that really just hits different for you, either as a child or even as an adult now?
Yeah. And like the psychology, it's so interesting, right? Because I like Panda Express because I want to eat it. I know it's not great for me. I am lucky that I don't live close by because if I did, I probably would eat it a lot more. I'd probably be financially worse off. And that also kind of goes into like, going out to get coffees and lattes and stuff, right? It's so, coffee shops are everywhere and it's so easy to go to Starbucks and spend minimum $5 to $10, $15 in one trip. And you could be doing that like every single day.
And you think about it from the business aspect, they're often, willing to try and get you in, with the coffee because it's relatively cheap for them to produce. Once they get the overhead down and the machines and the people making it, it's actually a great way for the companies and businesses to make money, right? And then they try and get you on all the other items. I think it's a, kind of great pivot and point. So, talking about just some of the fixed costs, right? Before we kind of get into budgeting and things, but, like you said, one of the important things just to maintain our finances as adults now, right? So we're dealing with not only our kids, both of us are also trying to help out with our parents and families, right? And then ultimately also making sure that we take time and also the money to spend on ourselves, right? But going into the kind of financial budgets, maybe talk a little bit about, how your finances and your budgets impact your day to day. Right, like what kind of makes up with it, because I think as we've gotten older, specifically, I know that both of us have signed into the You Need a Budget, specifically the YNAB methodology. I think it's worked for us. Again, we're not experts. This is just what we have personally used. Obviously before this, I started, a friend had showed me some spreadsheets and some budgets. Fortunately for me, I really enjoy spreadsheets. I'm kind of an overthinker sometimes about it. But kind of curious, how did that kind of change your way of thinking? Have you seen, any kind of growth and just changes over time, and any kind of analytics and things, that you've observed with your own spending?
Yeah, so I started using YNAB probably around 2014, and it was actually I bought it on Steam as they sell video games there, and it was like, you need a budget, and I thought it was a game, so I bought it. Turns out it was actually a budgeting app. Truly changed my life. But, for those folks who don't know, it's essentially like the envelope method, right? You have different envelopes for different categories, and you're supposed to put cash in each envelope. And then as you're going through the month, you're taking money out of each envelope to spend for those necessary things. And this is just a digital form. We're all living in like the credit card digital age, right? So that's how that works. When I first started using it, I realized quickly that they have a term called credit card float, and it's where you're putting all your spending on your credit card and then paying them off, but you're not really utilizing the cash that you own, and you're essentially all your cash is just kind of going into the cards. Doesn't have a purpose, and you're essentially living off the credit card. You may not even be carrying a credit card balance, right? And I realized, like, wow, like there's a lot of psychology behind how they built this application. And it truly started to change how I understood what my money was doing. And one of the goals of that app is to help you either pay off your debts or, if you have loans and mortgages and things. But but to truly give all your money a purpose. And as I started using it, I was able to realize like, oh, wow, like I am spending so much money on eating out. We were going to, we lived in the Midwest. We lived like a block away from a Starbucks, and we were going to Starbucks all the time to study. And, you need a drink, you need a snack. You're spending hundreds of dollars a month, and, as a student, like that is not sustainable at all. And over time, it has changed how I look at money. Having a budget, and especially with the philosophy that YNAB uses, it made me realize, like, wait a minute, like I am spending so much money on dining out, I should be cooking at home. And the second part of that is, especially with coffee, I realized like I would go get a coffee, but it wasn't just a coffee. It'd be like a coffee plus whatever, a bagel sandwich, right? I actually did the math for 1 year. And when I had completely switched over to making coffee at home, I probably saved like a couple of thousands of dollars just from not eating out as much.
Yeah.
And it makes such a huge difference. A long time ago, I had credit card debt. And when I started using the app, I was able to pay that debt off within like a year or two. And I've never had it since.
Which is incredible. I mean, I know there's, talking about debt, there are friends and people that we see online also that just forever saddled with debt, right? And without intentional spending, it is very difficult to dig yourself out, right? And talking about the psychology of this. So, I'm against, and amongst my friends, they all kind of know, I kind of joke about this, that I love listening to a specific content creator, Ramit Sethi. He created a Netflix show, basically called, I'll Teach You to Be Rich. And, he talks a lot about these different things, right? He talks about, debt and how you handle it. And the interesting thing that he's, and he does a weekly podcast where he interviews couples and peeks behind the curtain. And the people are very brave and kind of go through their finances. And again, different approaches, right? So we talked about you need a budget. His methodology is called a conscious spending plan, right? So essentially, not exactly a budget, but similar concept of saying, taking your dollars and making sure that they're serving you, right? Are you allocating them where you want them to be towards your rich life, right? Towards the direction of where you want to be, right? And like you said, do you know where your money even is going? Right? Once you start to break down the rough estimates of how much your actual fixed costs are, how much income you're bringing in, do you even know how much income you're making? He has a bunch of, kind of percentages where often 50% of the people that show up on a show don't actually know how much they make a year, right? And then suddenly, how much they actually make on paper might be 25, 30, 50% more, yet they still feel behind. They still aren't able to keep up. And there's so many reasons why. We won't get into all of them today, but it's just fascinating, And what I think is interesting about some of that debt is, like you said, some people will emotionally have, growing up from their parents and families, been taught the psychology of money. They've passed down this message and they don't even realize it. It is often, are you okay with debt? Maybe I will forever live with debt. I'm going to die with this debt. It could be student loans, could be, house, you could be, house poor, right? On paper, you might have a lot of money, but you might have, bitten off too much, more than you could chew, and you can't afford the house, right? And you're essentially drowning yourself in this debt, and you just bring on this anxiety and stress on a daily basis because you can't even feed your family, right? Because you bought this house that you continue to dream and want to live that life, but you just can't afford it. Which is something that I love to bring up, right? And I still sometimes genuinely struggle with this. How can you identify if you could truly afford something, right? I'm kind of curious, right? Have you ever come across that where you've kind of talked within your family, can we afford this? It could be a vacation, could be a brand new car, could be any little thing. Can I afford this new phone that I want? I know we're both techies. We always love a new gadget, right? But genuinely, can you afford it? Has it really any kind of personal anecdotes you could share?
Yeah, I at some point I was a person who would change their phone every year, and it was really easy to justify like I need
you gotta have
the latest phone, right?
Yeah, you would be shamed otherwise if you didn't have the latest and greatest.
I'm not even an iPhone user, but the stress of not having an iPhone for some people can be even worse than that,
Yeah.
right? But, not having the latest tech gadget, switching my phone every year, just saying, well, I spent a couple of $100 on the first phone, and now it's really only $200 to
Mm.
upgrade. And
That
every year,
justification real comes in
this
handy.
the sunk cost, right? Like I'm never getting that money back, so I might as well do it. Um, it changes like how we view things, and it's not even just how we view it. We're also being marketed to in that manner,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah.
things have changed today where, you know, before it was like, oh, well, you can go buy your phone for, $9.99. And now it's,
You
well,
can
you can just
finance it.
rent
You
it for
can, yeah, you
$100 a
rent it.
month, right?
Right.
Like, forget about owning it.
Yeah.
Your cell
More and
provider will
more
just rent it to you.
you're going to
AppleCare, right?
subscription models.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you don't even get to own it, and your money just goes down the drain. You don't even get any residual value out of it. But being able to like um, change, every year to a different phone, I changed my mentality. Like this is something I need because of X, Y, and Z reason. And then as I started getting older, I realized like, what? Wait a minute! Like I don't need a new phone. I don't
Mm.
want to be able to. I want to be able to take that $200 and use it for something else.
Yeah.
And that pressure of having to do X, Y, Z thing starts to dissipate. And that is one of the things that I'm happy about in terms of my mentality change. But it can have such a huge impact on you as you're, growing up and in this day and age where everything is marketed that way to you too.
Yeah. Talking about, marketing and quote unquote limited edition, as I was going through cleaning up, I found a lot of, as we're both gamers, I found a lot of limited edition collector boxes. Did I really need all those things? I don't even remember half the stuff. There was a lot of, extra, art books and soundtracks and things that I never even opened. I kept them
Oh
in the
yeah.
box because just to have. And then nowadays it's like either it's going in the trash or it's getting donated. Do I even need those things?
Yeah.
And I think to your point, marketing can be scary. Talk about psychology of just getting people to buy stuff. I mean, they have some of the brightest people figuring out how we think, which is the scary thing, right? So, um, even more reason why I'm fascinated by psychology, right? The more you can get into the minds of people, and again, the strongest kind of organ in our body is the brain. It does things so unconsciously that we don't even realize it. And I think that's why I really enjoy listening to Ramit's podcast and his videos, because he interviews real couples and they often have a literal epiphany of, why do I behave and act this way unconsciously? Why am I spending this way? Right? There's so many different, kind of topics that we could talk about. We'll pick a few. But one of the things that I think is also interesting, which I hope we try not to do too much, but it's just human nature. It's comparing ourselves to our neighbors, right? We may not
Mm.
physically live close to each other, and we're not always one-upping each other sometimes. But fortunately, I think, as we've discussed, neither of us are really big onto social media, so we're able to kind of shield ourselves a bit. But the reality is, if you're on social media, you constantly see your friends. Of course, they're going to show all the best highlights. Everyone seems to be on vacation, spring
Yep.
break, summer break, holidays. How come everybody has so much money?
Yeah.
And I think one of the most interesting things that I don't remember where I even heard this from, but, if someone is physically unhealthy, you can see it. Right? You can see that they may need help. They're overweight. They're not doing well. Right? And you can see it with your own eyes. But can you tell how financially unhealthy someone is? You can't.
No.
Often the ones have so much money invested, but it's all in debt. And suddenly they feel like they're living this life of grandeur, and you're trying to keep up, and it becomes your identity, And
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, kind of curious if you've noticed any kind of keeping up with the Joneses or trying to one up anybody else. Do you have any of that in your life?
I feel like I grew up in that life because I want. It's not I'm not going to say everyone does it, but in some communities, it's very
talk about
very
name brands and things, right? I mean, it's
popular.
real
Yeah.
easy.
You want to be like the family with the nice house, the nice cars. They wear the
Be in the
nicest
in
clothes.
crowd. Yeah.
It impacts your social standing in some communities, right? And growing up, you can see some people would treat you differently for that. And that is a scary, scary prospect especially when you think about having kids and growing up. But in order to keep up with that level of spending, I have seen people just spend money like I just don't even understand where they think they got it from. Like they're just spending money just to keep up. Oh, I need to renovate my house. I'm going to put tons of money into it and add this room and this fancy thing. And it's like, but where are you getting the money from? And it's not something people, as you said, people even want to talk about.
Right.
And I've seen that in my own family too, where folks just, you find out like, hey, wait a minute, like, do you have a budget? Like, how are you spending money? Do you know where your money is going? And you confront people with those kind of questions and they can't answer it. Yeah. They just stare at you and it's a shock to them.
It almost doesn't even matter, right?
It doesn't register.
Right. Exactly. So I think, some of the interesting things from, again, these content creators that I've listened to, they talk about the idea of truly being guilt-free spending. How do you get to that point? And again, how can you truly define if you can afford something, right? There's so many, gotchas. Some of the largest purchases you'll ever make, a house, a car, weddings. These are some of the largest purchases, and vacations. Many of those things have many, many hidden costs. Mm-hmm. It's never on the surface what you think it is, right? So often, especially, like you said, the biggest things are eating out, food, groceries. Are you truly making good financial decisions? Or do you feel free to spend wherever you want to? And all of a sudden, over time, it catches up very quickly. We only recently started, going to Costco. We finally signed up for a membership, and suddenly you go there, it feels like you can't spend less than, a few $100s, right? Like you buy just like I swear I picked like 5 things. How is it so much money? And that's just how they get you, and you got to make sure you're not wasting it. You got to make sure that you're utilizing all of it, speaking of utilizing all the money, right? I'm kind of thinking, as a parent, one of the easiest ways to spend money, and we talked about this briefly just before about extracurricular activities, but, even away from extracurricular activities, let's just talk about the elephant in the room, right? Is the cost of children and pets is extremely high. If you have to deal with daycare, you have to deal with, obviously, food, diapers as you're growing older, school, transportation, all these things, maybe talk a little bit about how that has played a role in your life now. Like, where does it kind of fit? How do you prioritize?
It's not a sore spot, but, we love our kids and we want the best for them. And our kids are in daycare. As they are getting older, they need more room. And we're like, man, it'd be nice to buy a bigger house. We need a down payment. Oh, wait a minute. We spent all of that money on daycare. Yeah. That's currently how we feel about it right now. Daycare is great for allowing my wife and I to work. But my goodness, it is so expensive. Having kids is not something that people think about all the time, as this is going to be a financial line item. It sounds mean or sad or emotional to say it that way, cold take, but like, you have to budget so much money for a child. Not even daycare, right? Like, before even daycare is a thing, formula, if you need formula, all the equipment for like breastfeeding and all that kind of stuff, diapers, like you mentioned Costco, like we spend probably $100 a month on diapers, right? And pull-ups and things like that. And
not to mention if you have special needs, right?
Special
if there's any
needs,
kind of gluten-free, any kind of other allergies, right? Absolutely.
Kids getting sick, all the doctor's visits, all the co-pays, your medical insurance that you have. Now you have one kid, you have 2 kids, your premium skyrocketing, right? And And it's just such a
It's tough.
huge financial decision. That's why a lot of women, unfortunately, women in the families quit their job and work from home. I know men do as well, but it's generally like a societal thing where women do it.
Yeah,
and
they just feel pressured too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult. It is unfortunate. I think kind of rotating off of that, to your point, in the world that we live in now, right? We hope that there could be more sort of government potentially intervention and help, but it's tough, right? Some states are trying to do more than others, but it's very difficult. But I think bringing back to the emotion and what we just talked about, do you find yourself struggling to say no when your kids want something?
Oh. Honestly, the first 2 years when my first child was born, my first son,
I feel like you bought him everything.
My wife has a spreadsheet of all the sneakers that I bought from Adidas for my son that he didn't wear. We have a spreadsheet for it. I did a lot of deal hunting. You know, I got these sneakers for like $10 to $20.
Yeah, good deal.
They're great deals. I bought so many sneakers. There's a stack from the floor, probably 6 feet tall in our closet, of kids' sneakers. Luckily, we had a second child that we could use a majority of them. However, you know, like, oh, this is so cute. This is so adorable. I need to buy it. I want them to have it. I never had it as a kid. That was also a huge justification. I never got this as a kid. I was poor. I want my son to have, you know, these fly Adidas limited edition Lego collab sneakers.
Yeah.
Never wore it once.
Lego, Hot Wheels. My kids got a whole bunch of Hot Wheels. We have so many Nerf guns, so many things that my wife unfortunately gets frustrated saying, why do you keep buying more stuff? Why do you keep buying more games and toys? I'm like, why wouldn't I? The kids need it. You know, again, need it.
Yeah.
It's really not the kids. It's the psychology of us. We want to get it for the kids, you know,
yeah,
partially.
Funny thing, I actually literally today, two Nerf guns came in the mail. I'm not even joking. Yeah.
we went through that phase. And fortunately for us, which is really cool, there is a local area and kind of club that we go to where they sometimes have Nerf wars. So it's super cool. They kind of take over the area and all the kids get to bring their Nerf guns. They provide all the safe, you know, bullets, and they just have at it, which is super fun, right? I never, you know, had that growing up.
Yeah.
You know, and our house is only, you know, so big, so it's not like you can really have fun. So it's a great time for the kids to bring it out. But I do know some friends where, again, sometimes it can be difficult. You know, hopefully they have the means. Hopefully they're spending within their means and their budgets, right? And they're thinking it through and justifying that it is worth the investment or the money, right? Maybe it's just for fun, which is totally fine. But hopefully those are able to think about what those means are. And are they considering the hidden costs and can they justify it? You know? So something, especially for, you know, buying a house or a car, that was a question that we had. We ended up, you know, not too long ago, a year or so ago, we did have to purchase a new car. Our previous car was going through, you know, we could have kept it longer, but, you know, it was to a point where it was going to be major repairs. And we said, do we want to invest this money? It's like, you know what? Let's just try and get something nicer, get, you know, kind of upgrade and change. But the question I asked my wife in the car as we were going to, you know, check out the dealerships was, how do we know how much we can afford?
Yeah.
You know, that's the loaded question. And the answer I kind of got back was, if we have that much money in the bank account, then we can afford it. But that's not necessarily the answer, right? Because you have to think about insurance costs. You're going to have to think about, you know, maintenance. How are you going to, you know, whether it's gas or electric, how are you going to, you know, charge or, you know, get the car to move, you know? You're going to have to pay for parking, all sorts of stuff, you know? And take that into account for, again, obviously the biggest one is a house, right? And too often people just kind of see that monthly price and don't really think about the actual total cost of ownership.
Yeah.
You know? So...
Yeah, so that was actually interesting when we were first looking for our home. A lot of the guides online and stuff will say, like, you should spend 3 to 5 times your salary gross on your home. Like, the total value of your home should be like that much of your salary. And I'm thinking, like, but that's insane. You lose like half your salary in taxes and insurance and all this other, you know, deductibles. Like, where are you how am I supposed to afford that?
Probably a different time in our life too, especially with interest rates fluctuating.
That's
right?
true. That's true.
You know,
And
it was a different time, but absolutely.
I kept doing a lot of research, and people were like, yeah, that's definitely, this goes back to marketing, right? That's like a marketing thing where the loan companies want you to take large loans out. They get more money, they get more interest off of it.
And how do they build up demand? I mean, not to get into a tangent, or maybe, just the whole diamond industry.
Oh God.
Right?
3 months salary.
Yeah. Like, do you really love your significant other? Why aren't you spending that money? Right?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating,
Yeah, and the other predatory industry is also the baby industry. I don't know. Since I had kids more recently, like, there's like
there's so many gadgets
baby
and toys
crib.
and things.
It's all high tech gadgets now. There's like a baby crib, and it's like $2,000, and it'll like rock your baby. I think it's called a snoo. Like they're $2,000, but you can rent it if you really want it now. Yeah, they have rental plans
for
and
a
it's
low price.
Yeah. And like, do you love your child? Do you love your baby that's 1 week old? You need to buy this camera and this thing, that sock that measures their heart rate, so if they have a breathing episode or something, right?
Yeah.
Like the anxiety.
We had something for the crib, which we never even used. And it was, like you said, it was supposed to put it, obviously there was SIDS, so sudden infant death syndrome, right? Where you're not supposed to let the baby, flip on their belly. They had to stay on their back and all these other things. But we ended up never using it because, like you said, the anxiety of it going off and not knowing how to turn it off just was terrifying. And I mean, could something happen? Yes. But then you also start to think back. It's like, hey, when our parents grew up, they didn't have half this knowledge, of any. Where did this all come from? Is it all fear, or is this something real?
Yeah,
part
FOMO.
of me wants to say we kind of turned out okay, sort of.
Yeah, a lot of it is FOMO, like artificially induced. Having every single advertisement, saying you're missing out on this, you need this, you need this, you need this. That is also a reason for like a lot of the change in psychology on how we spend money.
Yeah.
And it's starting today, or at an early age, with just video games. So many different video games have gambling components to them now, with loot boxes and card games. You gotta get a dopamine boost when you open the next pack, and kids are spending thousands and billions of dollars a year on games like Fortnite and Call of Duty, with all the different skins that are available and things like that, right?
Yeah.
They're priming these kids to fail in the future when they get older, because they won't have the self-control. First it's video games. What's next? As soon as they go from young kids to teenagers and adults, and if they
already lived that life.
Exactly. And gambling is like another huge problem. I am a huge sports fan. 10, 15 years ago, you didn't hear a thing about gambling. Literally today,
you can gamble on anything, right?
It's even worse than that. Like the NBA brought to you by like DraftKings, MLB brought to you, like each baseball, NBA, football broadcast literally has like betting things on the bottom, and it's just strolling across. And if I open the ESPN app, I'll see the Knicks are playing the Pistons, or the Lakers are playing the Jazz. Here are the betting odds, and then right below it, if you have a gambling problem, please call. That's literally right in the app right now.
They got to build it in. They got to protect themselves just in case.
I mean, there's so much dangerous, dark psychology behind everything today that it's terrifying as a parent when you're like looking at your kids, and it's like, we're dealing with this now after all of our experience. How are they going to deal with it? Like my son the other day was sitting there watching TV. We don't have like cable or TV or anything. We're watching one of the streaming services, and an ad shows up, and he's like, I want that. I'm like, well, what? And he's like, I want those Skechers sneakers. I was like, for what? Like, there's literally a box of Adidas sneakers in our closet from to the ceiling. What do you need new sneakers for?
That
and he's
looks
like,
that looks so appealing.
He's like, I want it. I'm like,
yeah,
oh, these commercials, man.
Yeah.
Let's cancel the streaming service.
Talking about gambling, I mean, I hear you, because there are a lot of games like that, especially the games with the RNG, or the random number generator boxes, right? Where you just don't know. And I did play a few of those games. I had relatively good self-control, so I did not invest too much or spend too much on them. But I know friends that, really go into it, pretty hard. But like you said, I don't remember where. I think it was either in Europe or Asia, where they were setting, government rules that you have to advertise what the hit rates are. Because if you're not, then it's, the person has no idea how bad they're gambling. You could be gambling into a situation that is, unwinnable. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet you keep feeding money in hopes, and it never comes to fruition. Right? So some of these games often have to build in this, sort of backup, kind of system where you roll a certain amount of times and you're guaranteed to get something. Right?
Yeah.
That way it can't be zero. Right? And it can't be unknown. So it's really interesting. Like you said, they prey on these individuals, especially with kids, and they just have no idea. There's times where, especially if parents aren't necessarily paying attention, some kids may have gotten their parents' credit cards, and they have, free will, and they just push the button,
Oh, yeah.
and just get used to it and just keep, racking it up. Yeah. Kind of going through and just thinking about, how we got to this point, a few other things, what we like to talk about is, again, just financial therapy and, content creators. There's a number of people that I've seen online of all sorts. And I think, again, it's something that's very important to me. I honestly maybe sometimes think about it too much, about the concept of money, right? But regardless, everyone needs money to live, right? I think I'd love to hear, from some of the listeners, just where do you feel in your life with the money? Are there any, big spends and things that maybe have, impacted you, or, you wish you knew that you could pass along a lesson, right? We often, as we're getting older, we try and share our wisdom with the younger people, but then realize that even if we heard these messages when we were younger, we may not have listened.
Yeah.
Sometimes you still got to go through it and kind of experience it yourself, like you said, right? We're really just made up of all the experiences that we go through, to kind of drive our life. But any other major topics you want to hit? I think some of the things we could talk about, which again, we don't want to get into too much, the focus today's call is more about just some of our experiences, right? There's a lot of financial literacy that we could hit maybe for another time, right? But it's important to know about, where your retirement plan is. It's important to think about investments. I know you might, kind of rabbit hole this for a little bit, so we'll leave that for you later. But just being able to understand where your money's going and how are you doing, right? A lot of people may sometimes honestly live in fear. I know sometimes I do. Again, that kind of scarcity mindset. And the only way to really kind of break through that is to have a plan, right? Is to think through where is your money serving you, right? Are you living the rich life that you want to live?
Yeah.
And if not, how do you get there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing, when I had credit card debt, breaking down how much I was paying and then how much interest I was losing, or how much interest cost me, I was like, wait a minute, that's like, that's a significant chunk. Now I understand where my money is going. It's literally going to pay this. And that was like an eye-opening moment. So sitting down, figuring out, as you said, like how much your expenses are and things of like that, how much is coming in, how much is going out, what are the essential fixed expenses, and being able to have that conversation, especially with your spouse. Like that's also another thing we didn't really talk about too much, but spousal spending and, having a joint mentality that this is our money.
It's true.
Is really important.
Now that you bring that up, that does bring up a good point. I feel like we could talk all day about this.
Oh, yeah.
But honestly, finances between couples. I think I know some friends where even though they've been married, they continue to live almost individual lives, right? They file their taxes separately. They have their own little funds and things, and their bank accounts, and they kind of split it how they think is even. But some of the most common things to happen is that often, mom gets the kids, mom gets the groceries, dad gets this and that. and it's not necessarily proportional.
Yeah.
It's actually quite infrequent that, both, members of the couple make the same amount, right? And as you grow older, your potential for financial gain and change for your career could be vastly different. So how do you make sure you're portioning it out to be quote unquote fair, right? And are you truly living the life and the finances of a couple and a family? You know what I mean? It's sometimes very difficult to kind of track and but it's important to think about, right? The first step is always going to be just identifying what situation you're in and thinking about, again, how is your money serving you,
Yeah.
right? So awesome topics. I think we'll kind of wrap up, maybe jump into how we got here. Any kind of shout outs of things that, we kind of deviated on that maybe kind of snuck up on us?
Yeah, Panda Express, baby.
I've heard from a listener to talk about how we go off on these tangents about food, but I think as you get to know us, you'll realize that we are quite food motivated and driven.
It's in my mind because we went, we had a day off. We went to the zoo and there's a Panda Express there. I was like,
Nice.
we gotta get it. And so we got it, and it was great.
My question for you is do your kids appreciate it as much as you?
Oh, they love it.
Oh, they love it. Oh,
they love
you're
it.
passing on that generational.
I am very lucky that my kids eat different foods, but also will eat a little bit spicy too.
Yeah.
So I'll get like the orange chicken and
nice.
Throw a little of the red sauce on it. Oh, it's so good.
Nice. All right. Excellent. And the other segment that we kind of go to is what was your rabbit hole of recent times?
So lately, it's appropriate that this is the financial literacy and therapy episode, but I've been into stock trading and just down a rabbit hole of like building trading systems and like how algorithmic trading works, because
we all want to make money fast.
We all want to make money fast. And how are hedge funds and all these places making billions of dollars a year? So just understanding like how algorithmic trading works, which is essentially like trading, computer systems trading for you on your own behalf. You're not just sitting there buying stocks based off like fundamentals and, bank statements and stuff like that. So I've been doing a lot of research and trying to build things because it's kind of fun.
Interesting. And almost testing out just your theories.
Yeah, see if my theories work. Basically it's called backtesting. So you have an idea, you build a backtesting system which takes your idea and tests it off of the stock market throughout time using real data. And
that's cool.
It gives you like a return, and there's different things like a Sharpe ratio that kind of tell you like, oh, like this was actually a valid system, relatively speaking, and it's not, your system is really fitted for the data, which that, kind of gets into like statistics and mathematics and stuff, but it's definitely, it's entertaining, to be honest.
Nice.
I don't know if I'll ever make money, but it's just
I was going to say, I wish you the best. I hope you make a ton of money. But yeah, I think again, we're not, particularly recommending any investment advice or anything like that, but, it is interesting, right? We see all these stories about, these investment advisors and mutual funds, and are they truly making a lot of money? Or is it better just and safer just to go with, general low cost, mutual funds, right? Again, there's different ways and to tackle it. Some people have gotten rich and gotten lucky. Some people have also lost a lot. So it really depends on your, risk tolerance and where you are in life and, kind of your methodology of investment.
Yeah.
So my rabbit hole of recent times was in the vein of, health, fitness, and kind of competition. I believe there was a recent High Rocks event. So for those that are not aware, it's kind of like CrossFit. I don't know if that's, a negative or a positive, but essentially it's a, physical fitness competition where you could do solo, you could do pairs, it could either be mixed couples or it could be same gender. And I don't remember exactly how many, but it's something along the lines of, I think, a 10K run, broken up into 1K sprints. And in between each 1K round is some sort of physical activity. So you'll have to either do farmer's carries, you'll have to do burpees, you have to do lunges, you have to push and pull the sled, and a whole bunch of different things. And it's just fascinating to me. Deep down, I think it would be super cool after your triathlon that maybe someday we sign up, kind of giving me a goal to aspire to, There'll be definitely things that I've never done before, but the coolest thing is that, we could actually do it together, and you basically both members have to do all the running together, but for each individual event, you can kind of tag in and out, right? So one person can be stronger than the other in certain events, and it sounds like an awesome experience to kind of go through. Obviously, very intimidating because I'm sure we're going to roll in and people are super jacked and fit that are, doing them for their, that's just their lifestyle. But would be, a fascinating thing to add to my list of things that I've tried to accomplish. Would probably be the most difficult physical thing I've ever done and may ever do, But something motivational. So yes, we'll see if I ever sign up one of these days.
Oh, well, we're definitely signing up.
we got to find the problem is also that it's not everywhere. So there's specific times, and you got to find in certain cities, right? And we don't live that close to each other. But like you said, it sounds like we're setting a date. We'll find something one of these days.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, pleasure talking to you. I look forward to our next episode. We'll catch you guys soon, and take care.
Yep. Stay tuned. Thank you.